just going to try to show you the layout techniques, because right now you're doing most of the saw techniques, but now we're going to get into how do I take an abstract drawing and translate it on something physical. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to start with the butt real quick. Hard. So, the two worst blocks, I don't care what state they're in, right? So if you plane something down, it doesn't look right, it doesn't fit right, you're going to take those two to make your butt joint. So again, I picked the two worst ones I made, which are the ones with paint on it. All that matters in the butt joint is that the end grain is touching the edge grain at a 90-degree angle, all right? You're trying to make sure that there's a 90-degree angle here. Now, in layout, so what I'm talking about is I'm going to draw a mark so I can hand drill for a nail. Because again, we're going to glue and nail the butt joint together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find what is half of 1 1/2. 0.75, which is 3/4. All right. So I set my combination square to 3/4 of an inch. Take my pencil. Mark a line. Now, in the opposite direction, I'm going to do 1/2 inch in. Because I want my hole to land right here. Does everyone see the cross? All right, so that's my drill spot. Lock that in the vise. Now, I can take, so this is called a 6D nail. D is referring to the size. So when I come under here onto the cabinet, there are nails named either a number followed by D. D is referring to a size. So a 6D should look like this. A 4D is like this, and a 10D is like that. So again, a 6D is in the 6D box. Now what I like to do is I like to take my nail, make a little imprint, so that when I start with my hand drill, I'm drilling exactly on the part where I marked. Does that make sense? So normally, when we're doing with power tools, we use something called an awl. All right? So this is an awl. So what I would do is I come up to my mark, put the tip on my mark, make an indent so that my drill bit doesn't drift around the piece. All right? So that makes sure it's dead center. I'm going to take my drill. My left hand is going to hold the top handle. My right hand is going to drive it. All right. Get to the bottom, and then I go in reverse. Now, this is what we call a pilot hole. Reason why we pilot hole our wood is so that it doesn't split in half when I go to nail it. All right, does that make sense to everyone? So now, hammering this together, I do find it is helpful to clamp it in the vise so that I can use the table as a rest. So this is flat to the vise. I'm going to put my piece on the table at 90 degrees, line it up, lock it in. Now, when holding a nail, I've seen many different techniques, but this is the one that works the best. Take my middle and my pointer finger, and I pinch it together like this. Hold it over my hole, and I just gently tap it in. All right? Once it's started, I can move my hand out of the way. And there's your butt joint. All right? Thank you. Moving on. Rabbit joint. So to lay this one out, it's going to require a couple more lines. So in the drawing, it says that from the bottom, I'm going to come up 3/4 of an inch, which is that magic number. Half of 1.5 inches is 3/4. So I'm going to make a mark on the edge grain at 3/4. I'm going to carry that line across the end grain, like that, and the opposite edge grain as well. Feel free to change hands too. You're not held to left and right. So if it's easier to do drawing with your left hand, this is fine. So again, this is not a righties exclusive class. So does everyone see that line, how it wraps around? I did. Oh darn, bro. Does anyone have another pencil I can borrow? Thank you, Jeff. We're all set. So Now, the next number that's up there is 1.5 inches. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to set my combination square to 1.5 inches. I'm going to line up with that mark. Does everyone see that? Gabby, you see that? See how I'm lined up the mark? All right. Line it up. And I'm going to trace an L shape now. You see how I use that line to create that? Now I'm going to carry that line over top. And down the opposite side. Now, what I got is a 3D object. So I took something from 2D and I drew it in 3D. So again, it's not just drawing it on the side. You need to connect, because there's two sides to it. You need to connect both sides by drawing across the end grain and the face grain of the board. Does everyone see how I did that? All right. Now, when it comes to cutting a rabbet, most of you are going to be using a Western back saw or Japanese saw. All right. Now, for the Western saws, I'll demonstrate. So to start a cut with the Western, remember I cut on the push stroke. All right. What I'm going to do is my key piece, all right, is going to be this here. So what's shaded in, I want to cut it. So I'm going to put the saw blade touching that line, right? And I draw until I create a curve, and then I'm going to start sawing straight down that piece. All right, so again, this cuts on the push stroke, cuts on the pull stroke. If I'm going to do this with a Japanese saw, I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm not going to do this. I'm going to come over to this side and draw it downward. All right, once I create a curve, I can start to level off my saw, just like ripping. And again, I'm focusing on holding it flat, and I'm not bending this. All right, so again, I'm pulling as straight as I can and pushing, pulling, pushing. All right. All right, now, quick question. Was I ripping or cross-cutting?
Cross-cutting.
I was ripping. When you go with the grain, you're ripping. Now, that was a mistake I made just to show. On a Japanese saw, you can use the ripping side if you want. Now, since it's such a small cut, you may use a crosscut saw to rip that small mark there. That is okay. But you're not going to take a crosscut saw and rip an entire board in half. Does that make sense? So for small detail work, this is the one rule. It's okay to do. But anything bigger than what we're doing, not okay. All right? Now that I've done that, I'm going to rotate it so I can approach it from the top now. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to meet the cut in the corner. Yes. Then I'm going to take the two pieces and glue it together. Now I have a lot of practice doing this, so it came out fairly perfect. So if it doesn't, what you're going to do, go over to the closet here, grab a 3-sided file, so it doesn't have a cutting edge on this side, and you're going to flatten this so that it fits in at perfectly 90. All right? Once that's set, then you're going to glue this together, and then you're all done. So that's the rabbet joint. The butt joint, this one here. So on the drawing it says center line, so CL, and then 3/4 to the left, 3/4 to the right. So if you don't have a piece that's exactly 6 inches, this is where you're going to use it. Or if you want, if you have all of them at 6, doesn't matter. So this one is at about 6. So I'm just going to cut it in the middle. So if you did it to 6, what's half of 6? 3. So I'm going to make a center mark at 3 inches. Does everyone see that? So it's 3-inch mark Carry that mark across. So from that mark, on the drawing it says 3/4 to the left, 3/4 to the right. Does everyone see that? So it's dotted down the middle. So that means my first mark should be in the center. From there, I'm going to measure 3/4 to the left of that line and 3/4 to the right. So the cool trick about combination squares is I actually can slide this so that 3/4 lines up exactly with my center line. So I can have the square, combination square, at the very end, but it reads 3/4 on one side of my line. Does that make sense? So then I make that mark, bring my combination square up, carry it across. Do the same for the other side. Now, just like the rabbit, I'm going to come down 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to set my combination square to 3/4 of an inch. Line it up with the face, come down the edge. And I can create an L like this. Does everyone see that? Yeah. Now I flip it, go to the other line, and I can connect the two together. So I come across, down. All right, now you got to repeat that on the back side too as well. Why do you think it's important to do it on both faces?
So you can see
Can you say it a little louder, Nico?
so you can see no matter what side you can it on.
Correct. So this also shows you too. So you can see both sides, see what you're doing. But you also can see if you're cutting crooked. So if you're cutting perfectly on one side and the saw is all the way on the other side of the piece, you're not cutting straight. So again, when you're cutting, you should be looking at both sides of your piece, making sure that you're making contact with both sides. If I have it perfectly on line on top and then it gets wider at the bottom, what do you think the problem is? So I'm cutting down and it gets wider at the bottom. My blade's crooked. So if you got a perfect contact all the way down, you're holding your saw straight. If it is on par in the front but not in the back, you're tilted like this. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
All right, so let's finish up this data real quick. All right, now, as opposed to the rabbit, I just can't cut this out because it's connected in the middle of my piece. So what I'm going to do, and this pertains to everything else in this class, is called relief cuts. So I'm not only going to cut these measurements here, I'm going to cut the center mark and 2 additional lines. All right? I'm going to cut those lines all the way down to touch both sides of my data. So just to show you real quick. I'll use the Western saw this time. Now, does it matter if the center relief cuts are straight or flat? No. What matters is that the line meets up perfectly on both edges of the board. So again, if one cuts lower than the other, you're going to have a problem. So again, hold your saw parallel and cut through. Now, one other thing too, happens every year. Make sure that your stop line isn't parallel with the steel vise. So again, you want to clamp this in so it's high enough so that if you meet your line, you're not touching this with the blade. All right? So again, just double checking. Good, good, good. I'm going to finish it off with the Japanese saw on my final cuts. Now these outside cuts are the most important, Ness. These last 2 cuts are the most important.
They are.
Yes. So if you do it wider, or if you cut into your line, the piece is not going to fit. Is it okay to cut shorter? So if I leave a little bit of space on the inside? Yes, because you can file it out to perfect. So again, if you don't feel confident with this cut, if you've done the rabbit and you don't think you're confident with it, it's okay to come in a little bit, cut your mark, and then file it out to perfect fit. Does that make sense to everyone? How am I going to get that out?
Oh no.
What?
I don't know. I should always
Ness.
know.
Would you get like pliers?
So I'm going to grab that and
Yeah.
try to rip that out.
No, there's like a clamp where you can like grab it and like
I disagree.
pull.
So I'm going to grab a pair of these and
Yes.
You gotta cut under
No.
that.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut underneath. A chisel.
Whoa!
That was close.
chisel. All right.
No.
So what I'm going to do, it is a steel backed, so I will be using a steel hammer. What you're going to do is it's called a scribe cut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these fibers first, gently, so when I go to chisel this across, it doesn't split below my line. So I'm going to come in here, put it right on my line, hold it straight up, come across. Do the same thing on the opposite side. Line it up. Alright, once that's done, I can put this back in my vise. Now the key thing is, when I'm cutting with a chisel, whatever plane I hold it at is what it will cut. So if I want to cut a flat plane, I want to hold it as flat as I can. Alright? I'm going to start at the top.
Whoa.
Now I would then clean that up with a file or a rasp, depending on how much is left over. And there's the data. All right, so, thank you. So with that said, if you're done with all 10 blocks, they are squared perfectly to 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches. You may do this now. If you're not there, do not worry, all right? You have 2 more classes to get this done. But remember, after next week, we are going to start on the main project. So time is of the essence. So get to work.